All right, let's get rocking.
All right, Mike from OM System. We're glad to have you. Sorry for the delay. There's gremlins in the system or something happening. This has never happened. This has never had this many levels of crazy before. So, but you know what? We're here, and I have Mike with
That's
OM
right.
System, and I love the hat. By the way, I think
Oh
that's
yes.
awesome.
Here we go.
Get that sweet new branding.
I have to get you one of these.
I'm looking forward to it. Actually have the OM1 web page pulled up, so I'm gonna have to borrow it from you again.
Nice.
Well, Mike, we're glad to have you. I know your screen share is working now, so
Yep.
better late than never. So we're gonna jump into
Absolutely.
it.
Yeah, no problem. Yeah,
And
let's do it.
Mike, I'll let you take it over from here. We'll make sure we're being a bit more efficient with everybody's time.
Thanks. And thanks, Tyler. I appreciate it. Hey, everybody, this is Mike Amico from OM System coming at you with Bedford Camera here. And I appreciate everybody hanging for about 25 minutes here. We just had some technical glitches to fix, and it happens. I mean, we're virtual, and sometimes things work perfectly and sometimes they don't. Actually, the last one I did was, I'm a little rusty. It's been a couple of months since I've done a virtual. And I believe the last one or the first to last one I did, my system went out on me. And but the sound was there, the video was there on my laptop, and everybody heard me walking around my house with the power out. But it was only certain sections of power, so you never know what's going to happen. It's always an adventure with OM System. So here we go. I'm going to share my screen here and get us started, since you guys were very patiently waiting for us. And I'm sure rumors have started. But we're here. So I'm going to cut my video so you guys don't have to stare at me through this whole thing. And let's get started with some bird photography and get things rocking a little bit here. So I appreciate everybody coming and taking the time. And, today we're going to talk about some tips for shooting birds, and hopefully get you started on your journey with photographing birds. I'm still new at it. I would say it's one of the hardest things I've ever done, and I've been doing it for about 6 years, and I still don't know the birds that well. So I'm still in my infancy with that, and I think it's a big challenge, but I love it because it just keeps you shooting and keeps you sharp to really get out there. And so hopefully these tips will help you out, and also some other tidbits I'll put in here. So if you guys don't know me, my name is Mike Amico, and I've been in the photo industry for about 22 years now, and been with Olympus / OM System for a total of about 7. So most of my career has been here, with OM, of course, being about almost 2 years. And I have a lot of fun with the cameras. What I love about the 4/3 system is just the size and the power. And I was with 4/3 when it first was introduced, and the idea was to be small and compact and lightweight, which as a whole system it is. And coming back to it with Olympus, the technology had changed so much, and the cameras are just so fast now and so creative with the computational features and all that fun stuff. It just makes them like little toys to me. So the weight is one thing. I could take a hike, take a shot, come back down the mountain with my friends, have a backpack full of gear and not worry about it. But having some of those computational features also just make them really fun. And I think I've been shooting probably just about every day in the last 7 years, more than I ever have. So so that's me. And today we're actually bringing this to you with Bedford Camera and Video. So if you guys are already customers of Bedford, then you know how good these guys are. And if you're not, then definitely check them out at bedfords.com. Check them out on Instagram, Bedford Camera. And these guys know how to do it right, and they really take care of the customer. And likewise here, 29 minutes and we're in, and we're here for you. So we're going to do this. And so again, appreciate you guys being here, and let's look at what we're going to talk about today. So going to go through a little bit of Olympus and OM System advantages, a little bit of a gear overview. And that's just to show you sort of, if you're in the system or getting into the system that we have, what might work best for you for birding. I'm going to give you 15 birding tips. And these are tips that I've learned along the way and or have gathered from some of the other shooters that I've worked with and seen and admired. And also going to give you some settings to get you started. And some of those settings are more geared towards Olympus, but they will work for a lot of this stuff. Just kind of it goes with a lot of different systems. You just have to work it into your own camera system, but the tips are for everybody. And so let's go ahead and get started, you guys. So when I do my presentations, one of the things I like to do is to remind people to print. and to print big. Don't be afraid to print big. Coming from a former print company, a lot of us don't do this. We share our images online. We look at them on a phone. We put them on social media. But there's nothing like holding your own image in your hands and really hanging it somewhere, feeling it, seeing that sort of quote final of your image. There's really nothing like it. I mean, it's one thing to see it on a screen. It's another thing to see it printed on metal or paper or wood or acrylic. It's just an amazing feeling. So even if you're not selling your work, print something 20 by 24, print it 11 by 14, give it to a friend, hang it in a cafe. It's always a pleasure to see your stuff, and you feel an accomplishment when you see it in print. So don't be afraid to print your images. So some of the advantages, compact and powerful, and I love using my own images sometimes as opposed to some of the marketing images, because it really stands to show some of the stuff in the field. And the Micro Four Thirds cameras from OM System and Olympus, they really offer that compact and powerful solution for photographing birds. And one of the other things they do, aside from just being a much easier to carry, smaller and lighter kit, they really have some great reach, but also the macro telemacro capabilities. So this is Kevin Laughlin over here on the right from Wildside Nature Tours. It's from about 3 years ago when I met Kevin at the Biggest Week American Birding. And he's standing next to a gentleman who's using some of the competition, DSLR, not mirrorless. But the idea is that the focal length equivalence, this is where your difference comes into play, and having that 2 times equivalence and having the smaller, lighter system. But there's other things at play. Kevin's shooting the 300 millimeter f4 at the time with the Em1X, and he has 4-foot telemacro on that lens. So the gentleman next to him has to be 15 feet away from the subject to get a shot. So if a butterfly or a bird lands right next to these guys on the deck, Kevin can shoot it. And that's a big benefit when you're out in the field, not to mention that you don't really need a tripod. So, it doesn't clutter up the boardwalks. It doesn't get in the way of other birders with their binoculars. It just kind of keeps it nice and even out there, and a pleasure to be out there talking to everybody. Also on his side, Kevin has at the time, again, it was about 3 years ago, he has the Em1 Mark II with the 40 to 150 2.8 with a 1.4 converter hanging off the other side, as well as his water, his binoculars. So he's pretty well, stocked up there with gear, and, smiling, happy as ever. I love it. Another advantage is the renowned weather resistance. We have some great weather resistance, and we like to tout it in the industry, as the best. And we do give our cameras a rating. We were at an IPX1 with the Em1X and the Em1 Mark III, which is basically where they drip water on the camera, like you're seeing there in the video. And now we're at actually IP53, which is where they spray the water, like you're seeing there in the video, and they spray it at a 60-degree angle. And IP53 is now on the OM1, as well as some of the lenses that are out there. And the 5 and the 3, it's actually called an ingress protection rating. And you can look that up online and see all of their different numbers and what the ratings are. But the 5 stands for dust protection. And on the OM1 and some of the pro lenses, it just tells you that the dust won't enter the camera in any insufficient quantity to interfere with the operation. So you could still get some fine dust in there, but it's not going to interfere with the operation. And the 3 is the water rating. So where we were at IPX1, we're now at IPX3, which is basically that spraying water like you saw at an angle from 60 degrees vertical from the camera, and it won't affect the camera. So you're out in the pouring rain and you're perfectly fine. The camera on the OM1 is also freeze proof. So, extreme weather shooting is available on that. So you're going to see in this presentation where I kind of flip back and forth between the EM series cameras on the OMD and also the OM1, just because that camera just came out and it's really a step forward in some of the, weatherproofing and all that. So I'll jump a little bit back and forth, but it is what it is. It's, kind of changing and going into the new generation of cameras. The picture you saw of me before this was me shooting at Daytona, by the way. And I had the 40 to 150 2.8 on the Em1X. We were testing it out in Daytona when it came out. And there was a storm that came across for about 40 minutes. And a coworker of mine and I just shot the cars while the storm passed. No bags, no anything, just us getting cold and wet. It was 40 degrees in Florida when that came through. And I did get some shots. And these are some of the shots I got from that setup. Of course, not thinking about the cars coming off the track, but pretty cool. This car actually did a 360 just before this shot here. So yeah, it was fun. It was definitely fun. And again, not having to worry about covering your gear definitely makes it fun when you're out there shooting. And when you're birding, you're out in the weather. Now we still have the supersonic wave filter, our self-cleaning sensor, and this is something we've had for almost 20 years now. It came out in 2003 in the E1 DSLR that we had. That was our 4/3 DSLR, and it was the industry's first self-cleaning sensor. And we actually improved this 10% with the EM5 Mark III when it came out a few years ago, where we actually put a coating now on the sensor where the dust doesn't stick. So you turn the camera on and it shakes that sensor at 30,000 times. It shakes it and knocks that dust off. And so when you're in a dusty environment, you don't have to worry as much when you're changing your lenses. I always keep my camera kind of facing down, because dust doesn't fall up, and just change my lenses that way. But this definitely works really well. Having had cleaning shows and stuff like that, you rarely see an Olympus come through where they're really cleaning stubborn things off of the sensor. A lot of times they would clean the cameras, I would notice, and that's it. They wouldn't have to do anything with the sensor. So unless you sneeze on it or you get something really stubborn on there where you do need a cleaning, you're not going to see as much dust typically on the OM or Olympus cameras. Of course, the 5-axis in-body stabilization, which is second to none. And one of the reasons for that, everybody has stabilization now, and a lot of us have 5-axis in the industry. And you're not going to beat the 4/3 because it's a smaller mechanism with that smaller sensor. So the mechanism can move around that body a lot more. So it is really amazing. You're up to 8 stops now with the OM1 and the 150 to 400 or the 300 millimeter or the 12 to 100 f4 where they have the sync stabilization. Up to 8 stops, shutter speed stops. I mean, you can hand hold that 12 to 100 for like 2 or 3 seconds. Well, at least I can hold it for a second, but I've seen people hold it for 8. Not me. I drink too much coffee. But it's pretty amazing to be out there and be able to do that. And for me, from birding and having longer lenses and being able to hold them and be more, freely moving with my subject, it's been a big help. On another front, for landscape, it's been a huge help for doing things like waterfalls or even fireworks, and being able to handhold an image. So it's really amazing. It does become a crutch. There's been times where I've shot my 300 and I've hit the stabilization switch a couple of times, and looking at my photos going, geez, they're a little out of focus on this bird. And then I realized that I have my stabilizer off and I'm shooting at like 300th of a second or a 20th of a second at times when the bird's perched, and you just get so used to having it becomes a part of your shooting style. It's really amazing. And of course, any stabilization is amazing in any camera system, but it's just a pleasure to use in these. So as far as cameras in my lineup, what I recommend for birding. So we start out with the EM10, and then we have the EM5 as our mid-series, the EM1, and of course the OM1 are pro cameras. And, for me, I would recommend if somebody was getting into the system to start with at least the EM5, and then from there, go to the EM1. And the reason for that is the best camera is the one that inspires you, right? It's the one that you're going to want to feel and feel good with, take it out. If it feels good in your hand, you're going to use it. If you buy a camera just because you heard it was good or you read a lot about it, sometimes you pick it up without feeling it. And that's the great thing about going into a store like Bedford's, being able to pick up a camera and actually, try out different brands and feel in your hand what they feel like. And to me, that's the best way to buy a camera, because you don't want to take a camera out that you just buy it and look at it and it's just not feeling right. It makes you not want to learn, if that makes sense. So a camera that feels good is always the best camera. And the OM1 and the EM1s have a really nice feel to them, really nice grip, especially for the longer lenses. But the EM5 has the guts of my EM1 Mark II, my former pro camera. And it's a fast and accurate camera, 121 point autofocus sensors that are crosshair. So you turn it vertically, horizontally, you're going to capture something. It's very fast, do 60 frames a second on the EM1 II. The EM5 will do 30. So, you're a quick camera. It has a little bit lower, like I said, frame rates are a little lower, maybe 6 or 7 frames, if I remember right, mechanical, which is fast enough to capture birds. But the idea with the EM5 is that you have a compact, small, lightweight 4/3 camera. So it's the epitome of 4/3. I can take it to on a trip to another country, let's say, or to a place I want to visit, put a couple of small lenses on there, and I have this great compact system. I come home, I put a longer lens on, and I'm birding. And so that's the great thing about the EM5. What you lose out on is a larger battery, the ability to put a battery grip on with more power with a battery, extra battery, I should say, some more speed, a few more computational features, a little bit different of a build. You get into the EM1s or the OM1, you're more magnesium alloy. So a little more metal build on the body, a little more rugged, and, a little better stabilization as you go up. So it's not a slouch at all. The 5, the EM1 Mark III is a wonderful camera. EM1X obviously has that built-in grip, steps into the AI autofocus for birding, and the OM1, of course, our newest camera, has all the newest technology. So new sensor, new focusing system, new menu, everything, almost like a completely different camera. It's like taking everything you love about the EM1 series and putting it into a whole new camera. So kind of cool. But any of those cameras I'd recommend. Now, just that being said, not to stick on this page, if you have an EM10 entry level, or you have an older EM5 Mark II as an example, or what have you, it's not to say you can't shoot birds with that. If you learn your camera and you know what the shortcomings are, or what it can and can't do, the benefits and the negatives, you can shoot anything with those cameras. They're beautiful cameras. These are just going to be the most fast and accurate that I have in the line. That'll make it much easier to get into birding. So as far as lenses, you're going to want some long lenses, and that's one of the toughest things with birds. It gets expensive to get the higher aperture lenses, the faster lenses, because you're going to be shooting dusk and dawn and things like that. You have your tele extenders that work on most of these lenses here, except for that 75 to 300. And you want to get as close as you can to the subject without getting close sometimes. And so sometimes you just can't get that close. So you have to have these zooms. And, it's definitely, again, birding is tough. Sometimes you just have to admire what you're looking at and step away from taking the shot, I find. But the 75 to 300 is a great entry level, great for the EM5, of course, as well. Nice and lightweight and compact. And it would be my equivalent to a 150 to 600. So that's a great range. It is an f4.8 to 6.7. So you do need a lot of light with that lens. But most of us are out shooting during the day, and we're perfectly fine. 40 to 150 is one of my favorite lenses in the lineup. It's a pro lens, all weather sealed. What I love about this lens is it's every time I put it on the camera, I think to myself, why are you not using this more? It's great for everything from birding to landscape to portrait to sports. But the cool thing about the 40 to 150 for birding, it keeps that same size, your internal zoom. So if I put the 2x converter on there, I now have an equivalent of a 160 to 600 millimeter f5.6. So that's a great range for that lens being compact like that. And also for birding and birds like airplanes. It's great for airplanes as well as birds. I love that combo for that. So the 300 millimeter f4 is my favorite lens in the lineup. It's one of the sharpest ever made by Olympus, and I love that lens. A lot of the birds I shoot are in a marsh. They're further out. I always need that reach, and so I'll shoot that lens a lot of times with a 1.4 converter. Personally, I don't favor the 2x on that. I think it gets too far for me. I can't hold it. I'd rather put the 1.4 on. I don't see much of a loss of my image quality, and I'm at a 840 millimeter equivalent 5.6, so it's a nice range. But I love that 300 millimeter. I'll shoot butterflies with it. I'll shoot birds, grasshoppers while I'm out there shooting birds. The 100 to 400 is a great little lens, f5 to 6.3 image stabilized. So this one does not have the sync image stabilizer, but it does have image stabilization. It's a nice lens. It's got some of the professional coatings on it. It's a hefty build. It's a really nice lens. You do need some light. You're at f5 to 6.3. But it's a fantastic little lens. It will take the teleconverters, though. For me, I don't like personally putting them on because you're at f5, starting out. And I think that 100 to 400 being equivalent 200 to 835 millimeter gives you a nice range. So it's a nice lens to walk around with. And of course, the 150 to 400 with the 125 converter built in. This one is sort of the top lens in my category, in my line for birding. And it's amazing. It's a fantastic lens. I mean, this one I can't say anything bad about except for the price. It's a pricey lens at $74.99. and it has a hefty back order. But if you want one lens for birding, one camera, a lot of guys and girls are shooting, maybe they're shooting a Nikon Z full frame system, and they take trips to other countries for birds a couple times a year. This lens with maybe let's say you get an OM1 with the 150 to 400, and you get a 12 to 100. You have everything covered with two lenses and a body, and you could ship that out on an airplane. You could put it in the cabin with you, nice and easy. So very compact, very cool. That lens will also take the teleconverters. All right, let's get into some tips for you guys. You guys have been waiting a long time, and I want to make sure I get this covered. So I got 15 bird photography tips for you. And the first one is to learn as much as you can about birds. And a lot of these are going to seem a little bit like, duh, Mike, this is obvious. But we don't think about this sometimes. And, where can you find birds? Well, you could check with your local rescue centers. You can go to the local zoo. Zoos are a great place because sometimes you have birds that you don't see in your area. They're in their habitat for the most part. Even just walking around a zoo, you might see some birds just flying around. It's a great place to sort of hone your skills with your camera and get an idea of what birds are doing, kind of seeing what their traits are and things like that. Wildlife refuge. I know in the U.S., you could check out the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service website, the fws.gov, and you could find some wildlife refuges in your state. And that's a great place to go. Other countries have similar websites and sources for that information. In the U.S., we also have the National Audubon Society, audubon.org. And I know in Europe, there's other places as well. I've been researching that. So there's a lot of resources online to find, different areas to go and where the birds migrate and where they are. You can also start in your backyard. There's nothing wrong with putting up a portable blind, putting up a couple bird feeders, maybe some bird-friendly bushes. In my yard, I have a couple of old logs and some sticks, and I took a piece of rebar and I put a nice big giant branch on it where the birds can perch when they fly off of the birdhouses, and you can photograph them on the branch. And it's like a little mini studio in the backyard. And for me, I just open up my kitchen window and sit right in the kitchen and just photograph them from there. But you can go out on your porch or something like that, and you can sort of be still and quiet, and the birds get used to you. They come over and they'll do their thing, and you can photograph them. And again, keep an eye on their habits and traits. Number 3 is to watch the direction of both the sun and the wind. If you have the same direction going on, the sun and the wind are in the same direction, it's great conditions for shooting birds in flight. And you want to try to keep the sun at your back, because with the sun at your back, the sun's going to be hitting the bird, and it's going to be lighting up the bird. So you're going to get some nice light on the bird. And birds land and take off into the wind. So if you go to an airport and you watch airplanes land and take off, and you look at the flags that are flying at the airport, you'll see the wind is actually they're taking off against the wind, and that's the same thing with the birds. So they're going to fly and land into the wind. And birds in flight, you want to try to photograph when the sun is low. The morning, the afternoon, just like anything else in photography, right? Landscape, morning, afternoon, same kind of thing. They're more active, but also the lower light helps to light up the underside of their wings. If you're photographing in snow, the snow becomes sort of a reflector. You can get some of that light up into the wings. But if you've ever tried to photograph birds in flight, at noon, you'll notice that the wings are just pitch black underneath, and you're trying to bump up the shadows, and you can only do so much even with raw photos. And so trying to get that light up under the wings to really light them up is key. Now, you don't have to, on these tips, just take these with a grain of salt as well, especially my settings later. Take them with a grain of salt, because we all shoot differently. We all have our own style. And I think as you photograph and you copy people's settings, and you see something online and you copy it all, and I can't get birds in flight, and I copied all your settings. I see that all the time. And I think the fact is that we all shoot differently. And, somebody might use continuous focus, somebody might use single, somebody might use continuous with tracking and have better results. And so I think that's okay. There's nothing wrong with doing something different if it works for you. And I think that's the key. You kind of take things and you play with a little thing here and a little bit here, you put them all together, throw in a little bit of your style, and then that's what works for you. And that's okay. With any photography, there's no wrong way. So, and this also has to be, there's nothing wrong with shooting birds backlit at all. But if you want to, get some editors to look at your photos, maybe publish some photos. A lot of times they like to see that bird lit up like that. So isolate your subject the best you can. And this is tough. This is why we use the zooms, or we get as close as we can. But try to keep a clean background. Don't split the head with a tree trunk. Try to avoid some clutter in the image, especially in front of the bird. And this is impossible sometimes. I'll show you that as we go further. Utilize a wider aperture. Open up that lens a little bit, right? Use that longer focal length for compression, like a 300 as an example at f4. You're really going to help to blur that background out and compress. And don't forget, with 4/3, you have that, that f4 is going to give you more depth of field than a 35. So you can really get some of that detail and still be at f4. Fill up the frame as much as you can with the bird, or make a headshot of the bird. So a lot of these tips you're going to see kind of relate to almost like human portraiture, right? Getting a clean background, the bride and the groom kissing. You kind of don't want like a tree coming out of her head, things like that. So, pretty much the same. Same here too, as well. Number 5, focus on the eyes of the bird. Try to get some catch light in the eyes. If you don't have catch light, a lot of times you're going to see almost like a dead looking bird, right? You're going to see something that just doesn't look right. It doesn't look alive. And when you light the eyes up, like this shot of the burrowing owl in Cape Coral, Florida, when you do that, just like portrait photography, again, it makes the eyes pop, right? If you look at senior portraits around the internet, right now, you'll see a lot of times, parents will just grab an iPhone or whatever and shoot their kids with capture their kids, with their iPhone for their senior portraits. And a lot of times the eyes are just black. There's just no life to them. But then you see like a pro or somebody who knows to reflect light back up into the eyes, or to use light. And you'll see where those eyes are lit up, and it really makes a ton of difference in those photos. Same thing with birds. When you can get some of this lit up and you can really get that sun in there, it really makes them alive. Use the surroundings to frame your subject, number 6. So a couple slides back, I said don't have clutter, and sometimes it's impossible. And if you look at this image, there's tons of clutter right here, right? So I tried to keep the bird sort of in a certain spot. I can only get so close with the sandhill crane. And I tried using the branches for more of a leading line. So I tried using some of the composition techniques, which this case, the rule of thirds, where you split up your screen into thirds, and try to get that head sort of over into one of the thirds over there where the lines cross, and just kind of work with the lines or the clutter. So sometimes you can really work with what you have to make a great shot. Conversely, sometimes you just don't get the shot. I've seen countless times where people have sent me images and just said, the camera's not working, or the 100 to 400 just isn't working. There's something wrong with the lens. And they'll have a bird like this that's really far out, and they're at 400. So they're cranked out, they're zoomed in. The bird's really far out. It's running along a field. They're at 2/50th of a second. So the bird's out of focus. The metering's all over the place. And so, you have snow and you have a dark woods behind them. So sometimes you just don't get the shot. You crop in on something like that and it's not going to matter because the bird's out. So you just admire the bird, and, you just watch them for a little while. But you can do it. Takes practice. So number 7 is to learn everything and become comfortable with the camera you have. And I can't stress this enough. No matter what camera you have, they're all computers now, especially going mirrorless with everybody. We've been mirrorless from the beginnings. I've been selling and shooting mirrorless since 2008. But everybody's mirrorless now. And DSLRs, yes, they're digital, but man, mirrorless cameras are just so much more digital, right? So everything is a computer. So you're holding a computer in your hand, and if you don't shoot it for a month, you kind of forget it. So play with your camera, learn it as much as you can, because once you get comfortable with that gear, once you learn how to use your custom functions and buttons, and you learn how to really work around that camera, it becomes an extension of your hand, and you can really anticipate the movement of the birds. You're not really worried about fumbling with buttons on your camera. You kind of know where everything is, and you can work around some of those shortcomings and things of that nature. There's no perfect camera, so we really have to compensate with our technique sometimes. And so just keep practicing. Number 8, and I'll probably repeat this a few times, for flying birds, capture the wings in the up position if you can, or in the down position. Try not to get pancakes, and that's where that's just that flat kind of bird, though I've seen some really cool ones. So again, it's just a tip. You can always break rules. I've seen some cool ones that are pancakes that are coming at you. So, and just be aware of your shutter speed. Do you want to freeze action or do you want to show movement? I would say a minimum of 1,000th of a second when you're shooting birds. And for birds in flight, you want a minimum of 2,500th of a second if you want to freeze the wings from wingtip to wingtip. That's a minimum. If you want movement, of course, you can express that with slower shutter speed. Number 9 is to try to capture an odd number. So I have 3 birds here. So if you shoot 4, get rid of 1. I'm just kidding. Again, just a tip, but more to be more aesthetically pleasing. An odd number sometimes works better than an even number. So, a shot like this, I might have 10 of these shots, the same birds, and maybe there's more in the flock. But as you go through and you're editing your shots, you might see one that looks a little more pleasing as you get used to it, because maybe there's 3 instead of 4, or 5 instead of 6 or 8. And so, be on the lookout for that when you're doing your editing. Same thing here. It's really tough, but try not to overlap the wings on a bird. Try to keep them separate when photographing multiple birds. This is really tough. I got a lot of ducks and things like that where the wings are together, and it's okay, but if you can, you'll start noticing in those sequences that you're shooting, when you're shooting multiple shots, that you'll probably have shots like this where the wings are separate, and it does make for a better picture. So this one's key: shoot early in the morning or later in the afternoon. And I think this is key with all photography, right? Whether you're doing portraits, birds, whether you're doing landscape, macro, you're shooting bugs, they're less active in the morning or in the evening. With birds, they're more active. You're going to get birds feeding and things like that during those times, early morning, later in the afternoon. And typically that's when your light is at its best, right? You have that golden light, you have that nice low sun, just much more pleasing. And like in this shot here, you'll see that golden light just reflecting up from the water, and this is dirty swamp water, but it looks kind of cool because it's going to reflect that color of what's coming in from the sky above. So be cognizant of when you're shooting. Nothing wrong with shooting in the middle of the day. I do it all the time because I can't get myself up in the morning anymore, but just be aware that you're going to have those shadows in the middle of the day. You're going to have things like that. So you'll see some really good light at those other times. Number 12 is not to make sudden movements. Don't make sudden movements. So birds are pretty skittish and they scare easily. Try to stay low to the ground. Try to stay still a little bit. Don't make a lot of loud noises and all kinds of crazy movements. Just hang for a while. Stay in an area for a while. Watch the birds. This is at a local marsh I have, and sometimes you could just admire and observe and enjoy, taking those shots. You can see I use that 300 millimeter a lot. This is the Em1X with the 300 f4. Love that combo. Number 13 is to photograph what you love. And this is my favorite bird, the green heron. I love these guys because they're like Looney Tunes to me. They just do crazy poses, crazy things. They're super fast. They fish. I love it. But capture subjects that move you. You'll see it come out in your photos. When you really enjoy a subject or enjoy watching them, it'll show in your photography for sure. Don't worry about the trends, what other photographers are shooting. And what I mean about that is, a lot of times, and again, I'm still, I feel, in my infancy with birding. And sometimes in the local area I'm in, and then this happens everywhere, maybe there's eagles nesting or something like that, and a local group or somebody gets wind of it and puts it on social media, let's say, as an example. And the next thing you know, you have 50 photographers and people with their phones and videographers. They're all standing around a nest, and it stresses the bird, and it's everybody has to go, right? And I don't really worry about that. I sort of do my own thing. I just photograph what I love. I keep doing that. I'm not worried about seeing what everybody's seeing. So learn about the birds you love and focus on your next great and unique shot. Don't worry about the trends, what everybody's doing. The groups are great. I mean, I've met some fantastic people with birding. So it's an awesome, awesome genre. But again, just, think about the birds and not stressing them, and just enjoying what you're watching. Number 14 is be really, really patient. And that is really the key to getting the cool shots, right? It's not getting frustrated. It's waiting for the right conditions, and good subject matter will yield a great capture if you just wait. And it takes time. I mean, even some of the features on the cameras, like on our cameras, the pro capture, it takes time to get used to, what is the bird doing? When do I press the button? I was shooting a couple months ago, and this woman was next to me with her Nikon, and we were both shooting. We're the only ones there at the marsh, and I turn around and she goes, like, an hour goes by, and I turn around and she goes, oh, I forgot my memory card. So she's shooting with no memory card and all that time, and it's gone. And I said, I've done that. I've done that a million times. We all do that as photographers. And I said, but it's, if the camera allows it to shoot, you just do that sometimes. But she was out there, it was a great time, and you just take that in. It was, she played with her camera, and it happens. We're photographers, we're people. Number 15 is don't give up. And practice makes perfect. And the more you shoot, the more you learn about the subject and your gear. So again, even if you forget your memory card, you get frustrated, but you play with your gear a little bit. So your images are going to get better as you shoot. The more you shoot, the better they get. And that's not just the composition and all that. It's learning that gear. It's learning that computer. So those are my tips, you guys. And I'm going to go through some recommended settings and things of that nature. And again, the settings take with a grain of salt, because everybody shoots differently. I find myself playing a lot and doing different types of shooting with different types of birds, like whether it's birds in flight or birds perching. I might use different modes. Let's talk about modes on your mode dial and which setting. And again, this becomes sort of like a personal preference. But you're going to want to use obviously the ASM, right? Aperture priority, shutter priority, or manual. You're not going to want to use program with birds. You're not going to want to use auto. They're moving a lot. They're always moving. Even when they're sitting still, there's wind, there's feathers moving, all kinds of stuff. So you really want to take that into consideration and take control of your camera. Now, aperture priority is going to allow you to control your depth of field. So, you can easily control your exposure compensation on our cameras. That front dial, you can make it darker or lighter. So you can really adjust things on the fly nice and quick. Obviously, your shutter priority, you're going to control that shutter speed. So how fast that camera's shooting, birds in flight, things like that, fast moving subjects. You can easily control, again, that exposure compensation on the front of the camera. And of course, manual, you have control of both of those, right? The aperture and the shutter speed. And, I have a lot of guys that shoot only manual. And then I have people that shoot only shutter or only aperture. It's really a matter of what works for you. And I would say to definitely play, but you're going to want to be in one of those modes because you're going to want to have control over what your camera's doing when you're shooting birds. Another thing is custom modes. Now, on the EM5 and EM1 series, you have custom modes and the OM1, and you have 4 of them on the EM1 and OM1s. And they really allow you for quick access to your favorite shooting styles. So, for me, I use them typically for things like birds in flight, maybe my AI subject detection, autofocus, pro capture, and it's changed a little bit with the OM1 because the AI focus I could put on a function button now, turn it on and off nice and quick. But this is the old EM menus, just to give you an example on how to set custom modes. It's very, very easy. You set the camera for whatever you're shooting. So maybe I want to shoot birds in flight. So maybe I'm in shutter priority at 2500th of a second. Maybe I'm in spot metering, so on and so forth. I go into a custom mode in my menu system. I hit assign to custom mode. Maybe I put it on mode 1 set. And now whenever I go into C1 on my camera, custom 1, I'm in birds in flight. I'm at 2500th of a second, spot metering, shutter priority. And you could change those settings as you're in that mode. You just can't change whether you're in manual, shutter, aperture, or program. That's what's constant. But it allows you to flip really quick to a birds in flight when you're doing maybe birds perching. So it makes it easier to get into it. Same thing with like pro capture. I put it on custom 2, let's say. So I have a heron, it's going to go down and get a fish. I flip my camera to custom 2, and I'm already at my starting point settings for pro capture. So a cool thing about the cameras as well, the EM1 series and the OM1, is you can make the custom functions go to a function button as well. So I can use, for instance, my AEL button if I want on the OM1 for custom 1. So I could be shooting, I could press C1 and I'm in birds in flight. I don't have to change my mode dial. So there's many ways to use the custom modes, but as you start to get used to the camera, these are things that you start to play with. You say, oh, this is how I shoot birds in flight, but instead of constantly changing my camera all the time, I just put it on a custom mode. So very, very easy, quick way to get into certain settings or certain modes. Function buttons, like I mentioned, kind of similar. Function buttons are where you can change some of the buttons on the camera to get into certain modes nice and quick. They're just quick buttons. Which you may see, and what I use them for like for instance, the ones that I'm circling, exposure comp or ISO or record, they're already preset, a lot of them from the factory. So as you scroll through your menu, you'll see where they're preset. But you can change those. They're function buttons that can be changed. So the ISO button in this case on the right can be changed to a multitude of things. I think it's up to like 25 things or whatever. So what I use them for is custom modes. I'll put those on my function buttons. I use the AI detection on the OM1 that you can do on function buttons now. So I could turn it on and off, hold in the button, turn the front dial, and change which AI detection focus mode I want, whether I want planes, trains, automobiles, birds, cats, and dogs. So high resolution mode on the OM1, it's already on the record button. So I can change that and put it somewhere else, but I like it there. So I leave it. And live ND on the EM1s and the OM1, I put it on the front, on the left there on the top. So I put it next to the lens on the top button. And I turn it on and off, and I could turn on my live ND. Now, what that does is I don't have to dig into the menu now for any of these functions. So a lot of these little creative things that we have in the camera, a lot of these computational features, put them on a function button or a custom function, boom, they're right there at your fingertip. Now, 4/3 has always gotten a bad rap for ISO sensitivity. For many years, some of the pillars in the industry have marketed, low light high ISO. Now we're marketing megapixels. I can crop in a bird from 1,000 miles away with a medium format. Well, yeah, unless there's heat, and then you're going to have some problems. So it's great to market, but in the reality, there's a lot of negatives and benefits to every system and every way of doing things. And the low light high ISO, there was a challenge for 4/3 and a lot of lower light when it came to speeds of like 6,400, or I should say ISOs of 6,400 or 3,200, or, you were getting more noise, obviously, than a larger sensor camera. But there's a few things that have happened. One, there's a lot of software that has changed in the last couple of years, like Topaz and things like that, even our own OM workspace, where you can take older files and bring life to them again. And as long as you have light, as long as you're good and you have light and you use, these programs to clean up, you're fine for most things, as long as you're okay with it. And you'd be surprised once you spit out that JPEG from the raw file, how much it sharpens up and looks. And so don't be afraid of high ISO sensitivity. Now, I will say, like, this shot was with an EM1 II at 6,400 ISO in the woods while it was raining. So it was pretty dark. And I used Topaz on this one to clean it up. And I'm not really a Topaz guy. I use Lightroom, but it did a pretty good job, I thought. And so don't be afraid of those low light situations with the camera. Now, I will say that the new OM1 has a whole new sensor and a new processor. This is 8,000 ISO on the OM1. And the sensor is totally different. So the native ISO on the former sensor on the EM1s is 200 to 6,400, and then you boost to 25.6. The OM1 is 200 to 25.6. So there's your two extra stops that everybody talks about. You can go from 200 to 25.6. You can boost to 102,400. So 8,000, 12,000 is not a big deal if you have some light. You can clean it right up. It's pretty amazing, especially for 4/3. That's 12,600 on the OM1. And this is 25.6. So yeah, you're losing some detail, but this is 445 in January in Ohio. So this is getting dark. And I had the 300 f4 with the 1.4 converter. So I had auto ISO on, and it cranked me right up to 25.6. So don't be afraid of that. Exposure compensation, one of the great things about the mirrorless cameras is you can see your exposure taking place. So if you're using exposure comp, great thing is like, and using this little eagle stuffed animal, I love this. So I've kept this in the presentation. But the idea that you can, really adjust on the fly to take care of that exposure with, especially with something like an eagle, as an example, where you have that white head and you want to try not to blow out the head. It's really tough. You want to keep some detail, in those feathers and everything. So using your exposure comp, definitely with the live view, allows you to see that and take care of that. So the great thing about mirrorless cameras. Shutter speed, I mentioned this before and I'll mention it again. If you want to completely freeze the wingtips, wingtip to wingtip, try a shutter speed of 25/100th of a second or faster. And then, if you want some movement, 12/50th, 2,000th of a second. I've seen people pan at 1,000th or 1,600th and they're still wingtip to wingtip sharp. But for the most part, that gives you a starting point of where to start, with the camera. So we're almost done here, guys, and I appreciate you guys hanging out. I got a few more slides, but I appreciate you hanging because I know we started a little late. So here's some recommended settings that I use on the OM, and these are from the old, I don't want to say old, but the former EM1 menus. The OM1 is similar. It's a little bit different, so I use things a little bit differently, but for the most part, this is an idea of some settings that you could use. So birds in flight, you might want to use, like, say, for instance, shutter priority or manual. Maybe a shutter speed of 1250. They're faster. Now I usually set mine at 2500, like you see on the right there. I shut off that face detection. I use spot metering usually when I'm shooting birds. Again, these are things that you take with a grain of salt and you play with it. And I'm always changing stuff, but you play with it and mix it in with your own style. 25-point target, I usually use that. Sometimes I use the whole, all 121 points on the EM1, or on the new OM1 I'll use all 1056 points, because I'm shooting a bird flying across the sky, so I use them all so it captures it. 25-point is cool because I can move it around to certain birds on the OM1. Sequential shooting, I typically shoot low mechanical, which is 10 frames a second on the EM1s and OM1. Sometimes I'll shoot faster, like 25 frames a second electronic, but for the most part, 10 gets me what I need, so I don't have something looking at me and blinking for 50 images. It's pretty crazy what we have now, but it works. Continuous autofocus with tracking when I'm doing birds in flight on the EM1 series. When I'm doing the OM1, I use just continuous autofocus because I'm using the AI focus when I'm doing birds in flight. Usually I'm using the EM1X, and that one you want to use tracking and all 121 points. So a little different as you go. I usually put ISO in auto, and I'll set it so that it maxes out at maybe 12,000. And in body stabilization, I use it in auto. A lot of people don't. They change that. So again, it really depends on what you like, but these are where I kind of start out with my settings for the most part. Birds in action. So birds with like high speed stuff, they're moving around a lot. They're doing different things. Maybe a shutter speed of 1,000 or faster. Again, shutter priority or manual is where I'm at. I usually use like a single focus point. Sometimes I'll use a multi, like the 5 cross. Continuous autofocus, and I'll shoot silent sequential shooting at 18 frames a second. And this is on the EM1s. And you don't see me shooting on the OM1, I'm at 25 frames a second. You don't really see me shooting the full burst like OM1 120 frames a second or EM1 60 frames a second. And the reason for that is, when you're using the fast high speed and not the low speed, you're only focusing and metering once, and then you're bursting through the images. So if the bird's on the same plane of focus, you're fine. But if a bird's coming at you or it's erratic or whatever, on the low speed, you're going to focus a meter in between each shot. And I think that's much more accurate. So that's where I'm at. Again, continuous autofocus and ISO auto. A lot of guys will shift that ISO depending on the light. And it just depends on how you want to shoot. And then pro capture to start me out, like in a custom setting. I'll put that in either manual or shutter priority. I'll be at 1,000 or faster. Typically, I think I set mine at 1,600. You can see it on the right there. Pro capture low because I want to focus in between each shot. Now, if you have a Panasonic Leica lens, like a 100 to 400 or something like that, you're putting on the Olympus. Pro capture is kind of finicky. It works with the Olympus lenses in low and high, and other lenses, like if you adapt or you put a different brand on, it'll give you the high pro capture. So again, it'll focus once and meter once and blow through the shots, but pro capture low will focus and meter in between each shot. I'll use a single point typically, maybe the 5 cross, and continuous autofocus settings here. So this is what's going on with the AI focus in the new OM1. It's much more accurate than what was in the EM1 series. They've taken it another step from the EM1X, and it's super accurate. The OM1 has cross quad pixel autofocus, and there's 1,053 focus points. They cover 100% of the sensor. So the former sensor was 121 crosshair phase detect pixels that covered 70%. So it's much more accurate. You can see it grabbing the dog here. It creates a detailed color depth map, and it looks for that subject and pulls it out of that color, like you see on the left with the bird there. So pretty cool and pretty accurate. And one of the cool things that you can do is you can set up pro capture, which you have on the EM1 series. and you have it on the EM5 as well. And Pro Capture is really, really cool. I use it with the AI detection on the OM1, and it's fantastic. Pro Capture allows you to capture the shot after it happens. So you're basically focused and metered on something. Let's say I have a heron, and the heron's going to go down and grab a fish. And I've been watching this heron, and I kind of get an idea of about when they're going to go down. So I flip my custom function over to 2 or 3, wherever I have it set. I'm in Pro Capture. I focus and meter, and there's a little circle that shows up in the left-hand bottom corner of my camera to show me that I'm shooting. And I'm pressed halfway down on the shutter. And what's happening is the camera's buffering, up to 70 shots on the OM1, up to 35 on the EM1, and up to, I believe, 15 on the EM5, might be 25. I think it's 15. And so, or however you set it in the menu, like I set my OM1 for 25 images, like 70 for me is too much. So I'm focused and metered. The heron goes down, gets a fish, comes back up. I press the shutter button. I've captured the last, let's say, 25 shots in my case. So I have all them shots of the heron going down. In this case, it was a hawk taking off, and the hawk was in between all these branches. And this is the shot I picked out of all the shots. Now, something you'll notice here is the hawk's in between all these branches. This is with the OM1, and this is with the AI detect focus, and I was using 5-point focusing. So with the OM1, unlike the EM1X, you can direct your focus point to the subject, and it'll really pick up with that AI detect on the subject. So I was able to get in between the branches here to really pick up the subject. So it takes a little getting used to, but it's much more accurate. And these are some of the settings on the EM1 cameras. Similar in the OM1, it's in a different spot on the menu, but you'll see something very similar here. Mostly what you see on the right, which is where you can set up how many frames per second. How many frames per second you want to shoot. Sorry about that, you guys. I guess it was one click for that. You can set up how many frames per second. You can set up basically how many shots you want to capture pre, and then how many shots after you hold down the shutter button. And it's all based on the buffer and things of that nature. So, and you see that little shutter button on those pictures on the right, and that's basically like it's showing me that I'm going to capture 15 frames before, and then 10 after. I can hold it down up to 25. So you'll see that change as you're changing it in the menu. So you can really, kind of change where you're at, and that works for your shooting style. Do I want 70 frames, where I got all these different frames and it's filling up my buffer, or do I want, just 15 or 20 or 25? So very, very cool what you can do. Okay, I'm almost done here, you guys. Let's talk about autofocus settings. So one thing you can do is you can spot meter in autofocus. Excuse me. And I like to do this. So I use spot metering a lot, and it's tied to my focus point. So what I'll do is if I focus on the subject, it's going to meter right there. And basically you just go right into the menu and turn that on. Another thing you have is in the EM1 series and the OM1 is you have these settings for continuous autofocus. There's a sensitivity setting, and it only works with continuous autofocus, not with tracking. So just the continuous autofocus. And basically the sensitivity goes anywhere from 0 is the normal. That's your from out of the box, right from the factory. You can go up +2 to high or -2 to low. And basically what you're looking at is as you go +1 or 2, you're improving the performance on like moving subjects. So something changing direction, kind of going toward and away from the camera. Think of a squirrel kind of coming at you on a log, and it's moving back and forth. It's going to tighten up that autofocus, right? Low is more like when a subject is moving, they're passing, another subject's moving in front of another or something like that. So think of ducks, like, swimming by, and one duck goes in front of the one that you're focusing on. It's going to stick to the one you're focusing on a lot better. So again, you can set these. For me, I haven't played with them much, but I would probably put them in my custom functions, knowing when I'm shooting, like birds in flight or things of that nature. So that's your continuous autofocus sensitivity. You also have the ability to use a targeting pad. So a lot of people don't know this exists, or they have it on and they can't figure out why their nose is moving their focus points. So there's a couple of ways to move your focus points on the Olympus and OM cameras. You have a joystick on the EM1, EM1 III, and the OM1, and it's great. It works really, really well. You can also use your arrow pad, but there is the ability to use an autofocus targeting pad, and it's similar to having a joystick. Basically, you turn it on in the menu and you move your finger around on the lower right-hand side of your LCD while you're looking through the EVF, and you'll see it move the focus points around. It works really, really well. It's quick, and it's another way to move those focus points. So let's quickly look at the focus point targets, and then we'll finish up here, you guys. So your all target, which of course in the OM1 is 1053, in the EM1 series and the EM5 is 121. All target is using all those focus points. Great when you're shooting like birds in flight, trying to capture that entire scene, something going through that entire scene. And then of course you have your 9-point group, which is great for like a moving subject. For instance, this heron flying through the air, where you really have some meat on the subject. And then of course the 5-point, which I use sometimes for things like this, where a bird is, within some bushes, but not much. I could still kind of grab the meat of that bird there. And, some of these different instances, maybe a little bit of flying and this here. Single point is something I use a lot. It's just, a lot of times the birds that I'm shooting are within a lot of trees and bushes and things like that. And so I'm trying to really kind of get in there with the point to focus on them. And I find with the OM1, I use it a lot more because, again, I use the bird focusing in that camera a lot. It works really, really well. And I'm able to move that point to the subject I want within the frame. Then, of course, there's the small target. Now, the small target allows you to get in between those bushes, do macro photos, things like that a lot easier. So in this case here, I had the green heron, and this was a color photo, but there was so much going on. He's in the marsh. He's looking for a fish. He's right there focused on it. And there was all kinds of bushes and branches. And so I used that little small point to get that eye. And I kind of like the way it looked with the black and white. It didn't really work in color, but that's where the small target comes into play. So all right, guys. So I appreciate you hanging. I went kind of quick, about 20 minutes late, but I definitely am glad if you hung out and were able to, grab this presentation and enjoy it. Hopefully, I'm going to come out here. Hold on. All right. Let me see if I can come back to reality here. There we go. All right. So hopefully everybody enjoyed that. It was kind of quick. I went through, but I think you get the meat and potatoes of everything.
No, I think you did a great job making up for time. I know there was a slight delay this morning, a bit more than slight, but we made it.
It happens with technology. You never know. You never know what what you're going to get.
Exactly. But without this technology, this whole thing would have been impossible.
That's right. That's right. That's the great thing about it. You can sit in your house and have a cup of coffee and you have your camera in your hand. And so it's wonderful to have it. I'm glad we have it.
Absolutely. I know there were first of all, I'm glad you mentioned the first tip was being learn about these birds.
Yeah.
That's something that I'm dabbling in a little bit, but learning the migratory patterns,
yes,
how they hunt, things like that. Yep. It's fascinating to watch, but also when you learn it, you can help. It helps you to predict what they're going to do. It's very fascinating. And I'm also glad you're pointing out, shooting at a higher ISO, but there are so many digital tools out there. And yes, I know this is, it's kind of, it's a software thing. These software companies are doing their best to, calculate what they think is the right detail for this image. So yeah, there's a little bit of give and take, but there are so many, I mean, I'm sure you could, count on one hand how many updates there have been for different software that have had that enabled now. It's really cool to see it expand so much.
It really brings things more equal too. I mean, it makes it where you can really choose a camera nowadays based on really what feels good and what works for your specific category that you want to shoot or what have you, because they're all so great. It's just amazing what we have for tools nowadays. Just awesome.
An amazing time we live in. And I'm so glad you brought up that image of comparing the two sizes of those lenses. Oh, yeah. It's a stark contrast.
Absolutely.
So I really appreciate that. I'm sorry, I'm trying to see if there are any
any questions that pop out, let me know.
There are several of you. Yes, there was a delay. And again, we apologize. Thank you for sticking it out with us. I know that was pretty frustrating. It was even more frustrating on our side, trying to figure out what kink messed it up. But you know what? We went through it, and this is being recorded, so all attendees will get a link after, I think in about 24 hours after we end the meeting here.
Great.
So you can watch that again, take notes over again. If some of you had to leave for work, you can revisit this. And if you're here on YouTube, watching us on YouTube, shortly after we end this live stream, I think it'll process pretty quickly, and you'll be able to go through it again.
And again, the great thing about technology, right? You can record it and watch it at your leisure. So, and we'll do more of this, I'm sure. So, guys, be on the lookout for that for sure.
Absolutely. Yeah. And yeah, again, this technology is really incredible. But yeah, I think, thank everybody for coming here, bearing with us. Mike, always great to see you. Glad to have you again. Hope to see you in person again.
Absolutely. Always a pleasure.
Absolutely. So if any of you have any questions, feel free to reach out to Mike or reach out to Bedford, either in your local store or online. We'd be glad to help you out, figure out, what's going to be the best tools for what you're wanting to do.
Thanks, Tyler. Thanks everybody for joining. We appreciate it, and be on the lookout for the next one. So thanks everybody. Have a great afternoon or great morning, depending on where you're at.
See everybody.
All right. Take care.